I want to thank you for joining the Center for Reaching and Teaching the Whole Child, San Jose State University, the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and Children Now for our webinar on social emotional learning and culturally responsive teaching. I'm Brad Strong, Senior Director of Education Policy at Children Now, and we have a wonderful lineup of presenters today, as you can see. I'll note that Jake's child in the picture won't be saying much today, but children are definitely at the center of what drives all this work for all of us. With over 400 registered today, we know this is really an important topic, and thank you all for joining. First, Jake Schuler from the Commission on Teacher Credentialing and I will provide an overview of the new standards and expectations, as well as how they relate to social emotional learning and culturally responsive teaching. Then we'll turn you over to the amazing team at the Center for Reaching and Teaching the Whole Child and at the San Jose State University. Our first presenter is Jake Schuler. He's a consultant for the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing. We could not be more grateful for the leadership and staff at the Commission for what they've done to initiate these and adopt these new standards. Certainly with their leadership made possible through the work of everyone on this call, all of you and all of us presenting. And we know that these changes can really transform school climate through social emotional learning and culturally responsive teaching. So Jake, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Brad. So again, my name is Jake Schuler. I'm a consultant with the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. Before I start in on my slides, I just want to recognize the work of Brad Strong and Eduardo Aguilar from Children Now, and also Nancy Markowitz and her team from the Center for Reaching and Teaching the Whole Child for their work in organizing this webinar today. The Commission does a great job of bringing in stakeholder input as they draft and adopt new standards and expectations for beginning educators, but it really does take the effort of outside groups and programs to be innovative and to implement these new areas into the preparation programs. So to give you a basic overview of the teaching performance expectations and the California Administrator Performance Expectations, these are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that beginning general education teachers and administrators have the opportunity to learn in approved educator preparation programs. So these expectations are put in place through the Commission, and you'll see a lot of the concepts that we're talking about on this call today are integrated directly into these two bodies of expectations. These are learned through coursework, clinical practice, and by passing the TPA or Cal APA. And beginning teachers and administrators must meet these requirements prior to being recommended for the preliminary teaching or admin credential. So what the Commission is looking at is how programs integrate these different domains of the TPEs and the CAPES into their programs. So it's about program accountability. It's also about program discretion as to how that's done. So the program needs to ensure that candidates are given multiple opportunities in order to work with these expectations, and they'll be held accountable for it in the accreditation system. In program review, there'll actually be a course matrix that they will submit to the Commission showing where each portion of the TPEs and the CAPES are introduced, practiced, and assessed. And they must get to that assessment level as well for each area. Many of those will be covered in the TPA or the Cal APA, but those that are not must be assessed as well in the program. The last note here is that it's the program's discretion on how to meet these. So you'll hear a lot of great suggestions and ideas on the call today, but those are some of many ways that programs can go ahead and work on introducing those into their programs. So this is the outline of what the TPEs, so to focus on the teaching side, there's 6 different domains here: engaging and supporting all students, creating effective environments, understanding subject matter, planning and designing instruction for all students. And you'll see that all student language which relates a lot to the social emotional learning part that we'll be talking about as well. So there's been 3 different versions of the TPEs. 2001 was the initial set, and those were based on the CSTPs, the California Standards for the Teaching Profession, which are now considered the induction standards. In 2013, the TPEs were updated to incorporate Common Core State Standards, and the latest iteration, which was just adopted in 2016 but started many years before, was updated to align with the CTC's new accreditation system and these important new focus areas we're talking about today. So those focus areas were inclusion of restorative justice practices, supporting students with disabilities, social emotional learning and culturally responsive teaching, also integrating technology and visual and performing arts into all content areas, also dealt with issues of classroom management and with critical and creative and analytic thinking. So these are some examples, and as you look at these, remember again that programs will be indicating to the Commission during program review how each of these sub-units of the TPEs are actually brought into their program. So these are examples where you can see specifically social emotional learning and culturally responsive teaching examples in the language. So here you're applying knowledge of students, including their prior experiences, their interests, their social emotional learning needs, and their funds of knowledge to help engage them in learning. And a big focus of the new TPEs and as well as the new TPA assessment is not just looking at the needs of students, but also understanding the assets that each student brings to the classroom. The second example is about maintaining effective environments for student learning. We talk here about promoting their social emotional growth, development, individual responsibility, making sure to include restorative justice and conflict resolution practices to foster a caring community where each student is treated fairly, respected, and respectfully by adults and peers. The last example is in the area of planning instruction and designing learning experiences for all students. So here it's planning, designing, and implementing and monitoring instruction to provide access to the curriculum for all students, looking at developmentally, linguistic, and cultural appropriate learning activities, and making sure there's instructional materials and resources for all students, including English learners. Okay, thank you. Brad, back to you.
Thank you, Jake, and thanks again for the leadership at the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. You have done fantastic work, and the Commission leadership and staff has been wonderful throughout the last 3-4 years of this work. So before we move on, Jake talked about the new standards and expectations for both teachers and administrators. And today we're really focused on the teacher performance expectations related to social emotional learning and culturally responsive teaching. But I want to show you a collection of resources that Children Now has helped create, and as well as the Fixed School Discipline Coalition, and want to show you those resources for education faculty and educators that's available here.
The Center for Leadership, Equity, and Research and the Fixed School Discipline Coalition have released a new library of resources at the CLEAR, at the Center for Leadership, Equity, and Research. Those could be accessed from the CTC Standards tab. And these resources featured here on the CLEAR website provide access to recommended research, resource hubs, videos, webinars, toolkits, and articles that are aligned to the new standards and expectations for both teachers and administrators. So what we did was put together materials that we thought would be most helpful for education faculty, both in aligning their materials. So this is the administrative performance expectations. And you'll see how we've highlighted the areas that are address positive behavior interventions and supports and restorative justice, the mental health, social emotional learning, culturally responsive, And so all of those areas that are kind of whole child, school climate, student engagement based focused areas have been highlighted to, because many of them are new, and it would help for faculty to align their courses and know exactly what the expectations are. So we've taken this Mission on Teacher Credentialing documents and then highlighted those areas where the standards really pop out. And you can find those again at the CLEAR website. Here's for teacher performance expectations, and the ones we were just in were for the administrative performance expectations and the California Professional Standards for Educational Leaders. Then we also have gone into the various content or subject topics, issue areas, restorative justice, PBIS, social-emotional learning. And in there, we've identified resources that we think are a good jumping off point for faculty to overview as assignment, lesson planning material, reading material for lessons. And it really should be kind of a one-stop shop. We're hoping that it provides you both a comprehensive overview of what the new standards and expectations provide, as well as these materials for the various subject areas to go deeper and really know what the content is that you should be imparting with your candidates. And the last thing I mentioned is the Fixed School Discipline Educator Toolkit. Great primer to just kind of get a good overview before delving into all of the other areas.
Now that we've covered the foundation, I'm going to turn you over to Nancy to first hear more about the survey of teacher education programs in California, and then what we've all been waiting for is we can hear more about the excellent work at the Center for Reaching and Teaching the Whole Child. Dr. Nancy Markowitz. Nancy, take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And Brad and Jake, thank you so much for that great overview. The Center for Reaching and Teaching the Whole Child is delighted to be partnering with Children Now and CTC to support teacher preparation programs in the implementation of our state's new and exciting standards. To start, we wanted to gather baseline data on where teacher preparation programs are in their understanding of the new standards for SEL and CRT and what they need to support implementation. So we sent out a survey. The survey was conducted by our center, CTC, and Children Now. It was sent to deans, directors of teacher education, and credential analysts at all 95 institutions approved by CTC. We received 78 completed surveys, and Dr. Suzanne Buffard analyzed the data and wrote a summary of the findings in a report which will be available to you. Three major themes emerged from the survey. They included, number one, the need for greater clarity regarding what SEL skills need to be taught in pre-service and how to assess them. Second, there's a real need for concrete resources for teacher educators so they can use them to revise their courses and our programs. And finally, there's a need for more support to integrate SEL skill development into student teacher placements, courses, and supervision, so everything connected with the pre-service program. So the big ideas that we want to put forward here to respond to the survey are the following. Number one, we want to talk about the idea of a lens, a social-emotional learning and culturally responsive teaching lens. And later in this webinar, we're going to explain exactly what we're talking about when we talk about a lens. Number two is integrating into the ongoing curriculum and classroom management rather than siloing it into a standalone course or field experience. Third, attention to social-emotional learning skills must go together with culturally responsive teaching practices. So we bring the two together rather than separating out social-emotional learning and culturally responsive teaching. And finally, and what we'll start with next, is using a common language and framework throughout the program, which is very helpful in preparing with the students, the student teachers. So when we started this work 9 years ago at the center, with San Jose State University faculty and university supervisors, we worked on deciding what framework we wanted to use, and what we came up with was CASEL's core competencies. We found those to be the most helpful. And if you look at what CASEL defined SEL as the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. Now, if you look at the chart, what you see is 5 different areas of these competencies. 2 of them, the first 2, self-awareness, self-management, referring to the self internally. The second 2, the blue, social awareness and relationship skills, referring to the individual in relationship to the group, to the outside world. And finally, responsible decision-making occurs when you've got the other 4 in place. So what we did was at the when we were working with San Jose State is we realized that at the time, and this was back several years, there was more of attention to working with the children and developing children's social emotional learning skills. And what we realized was that that was not enough. We needed to also work with the teachers' social emotional learning skills. So we decided that we needed to add a lens to the practice of educators. So the lens is, just like teachers are trained to use pedagogical and curricular lenses to guide their instructional decision-making, we suggest that teachers need to develop a lens that focuses on social emotional learning skill development and culturally responsive teaching practices, which will guide the teachers regarding what questions they need to ask, what data they need to gather, and what steps they need to take that will increase their teaching effectiveness and student learning and ability to thrive. So we're not talking about an add-on program, but a way of thinking about and planning for ongoing instructional practice. So what we have then is another way of looking at adding on to social emotional learning, SEL, calling it social emotional dimensions of teaching and learning. So we're taking into account the teacher's own SEL competencies, their ability to manage the class, social and emotional environment, and their ability to foster those SEL skills in their students. Now, why should we care beyond the fact that SEL and CRT are part of the new TPEs? Why would CTC make explicit the need for teachers to be able to implement SEL? Well, most importantly, one could say that if you do a task analysis and you look at the Common Core standards, which I'm going to share a couple of them with you in a moment, you'll see that SEL competencies are foundational to achievement of Common Core standards. So you can first look at literacy Common Core standards. And when you look at those, you can say, okay, one of them is to participate in collaborative conversations with diverse partners. That's an academic standard. In order for children to be able to do that, they need to have certain social emotional learning skills that are developed at the same time. Social awareness, they've got to be aware of the strengths of themselves and others. They have to have empathy if they're going to be in collaborative conversations that will be productive. They've got to have the relationship skills. They've got to know how to work cooperatively. They've got to know how to resolve conflict. If you look at another standard, ask and answer questions to seek help, get information, ask for clarification, they've got to be able to identify their own feelings and needs. They have to have a growth mindset. They have to be comfortable in the classroom, being able to ask for help and seeing that as something that's valued in the classroom. If we look at the math practices, they're really, the social emotional learning skills are required throughout those. And 2 examples, one is like making sense of problems and persevering in solving them. Right in the mathematical practice language, you see the word persevere, which is from social emotional learning. They need to be self-aware, they need to be able to use self-talk, and Patty Swanson is going to be talking about this a little later in the webinar. They need to be able to be resilient in the face of obstacles. So when they're constructing a viable argument and critiquing the reasoning of others, which they're expected to do, in order to do so, they've got to identify their judgments and biases. They've got to be aware of others' strengths and their own strengths. They've got to be able to take a perspective and do reflective listening. All of these are social-emotional learning skills. Not only that, but what's not often talked about is that the teacher's own SEL skills that are needed. For the last several years that we've been bringing in Common Core standards, we need to be thinking about what teachers need to have in the way of SEL skill development in order to be able to handle all these new changes. They need to be able to maintain optimism and have a growth mindset so that it's okay to make errors, and that those making the errors, they're going to grow, they're going to become better teachers for doing it. They don't have to be perfect. They have to be resilient. They have to show compassion for themselves and others. They need to be able to work with with colleagues in their school. They need to have empathy for others. So all of these things they need to do, and so this is their own social-emotional skill development that's going to enable them to be productive educators and able to work with children effectively. Now, there's another piece to the puzzle. We've talked about social-emotional learning, and we've talked about the social-emotional dimensions of teaching and learning. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jolynn Asado, who's one of the faculty at San Jose State and is also someone who's worked with us for several years at the center as we've been building out our schema. And she's going to talk about the connection between social-emotional dimensions of teaching and learning and culturally responsive teaching.
Hi, thank you, Nancy, for the wonderful introduction. And yes, as she mentioned, I've been lucky enough to be able to work with the collaborative in integrating SEDTL into my methods course. And when we first started doing the work together of integrating what does this look like in our methods courses, I began to see many parallels and overlaps between many of the goals of SEDTL and also culturally relevant teaching. Specifically, when you shifted the focus on how to better serve students from diverse communities, particularly those that have been historically marginalized. So like SEDTL, one of the main goals is that culturally relevant teaching promotes humanizing pedagogies, or in other words, ways for teachers to see the whole child. What culturally relevant pedagogy or teaching adds to that conversation is that it's seeing the child, not only seeing the whole child in your classroom, but really making sure that it's grounded in who the whole child is, both in and out of your classrooms. And in other words, that means appreciating and nurturing the individual in your classroom, but also by appreciating the histories and cultural practices of the communities that these individual children belong to. And so what I'd like to do is sort of start with the foundational definition by the work of Geneva Gay. And she says that culturally responsive teaching is using the cultural knowledge, prior experiences, frames of reference, and performance styles of ethnically diverse students to make learning encounters more relevant to and effective for them. So in other words, if we unpack that a little bit, people have said that this is also teaching to culture through culture. And what that does is that at first, the first responses have been through the work of multicultural education, which really aimed at shifting the content so that the content of what we taught in classrooms better reflected our students and their communities. But it's not just the what that you're studying, but it's also the how. And so we're going a little bit deeper with that. And so building on that, additional work by Gloria Ladson-Billings in Culturally Relevant Pedagogy is that she gave us a framework, and I'm borrowing from this framework that she had created in 1995, that looked at different dimensions of what culturally relevant pedagogy is. So I want to start with that orange hexagon in the corner of academic achievement, and it begins with academic achievement, right? It's about how pedagogy sets all children up for academic success in conventional school-like terms, right? How are we able to give them access to the official curriculum of school and create opportunities for them to be successful? Okay? But it's not just the focus on academic achievement and access to the curriculum, but also if we shift over to that blue hexagon, it's also about preserving the sense of and cultivating cultural competence. In other words, this is reflecting that what we see about assets-based approaches, and that it's not just transitioning kids into success in the classroom, but also creating a space that's going to transform the school setting. And so building on the cultural assets that they bring in the practices to create a space that continues to nurture that and continue the development of those cultural practices within the classroom spaces. And last but not least, and perhaps this last domain is what I think CRT brings a lot to the conversation of SEDTL, is that taking a culturally relevant approach, we cannot neglect the socio-political context that also encompasses our students and our classrooms. And that in order to see the whole child, we can't deny the socio-political context around the whole child that affects our students. And so we need to cultivate that, be aware of, and respond to these other challenges outside the classroom. Okay, oops, sorry about that. And finally, what I want to do is I want to extend this conversation because you might be seeing where the field is going, and that a new wave of scholars are calling for us to recommit to culturally relevant pedagogy, and they are creating a new term called culturally sustaining pedagogy. And this is in reference to, again, some of the areas I think that are going to be really fruitful and important for us in teacher preparation. One of the critiques was that we tended to see with culturally relevant pedagogy that culture is a static checklist, that culture doesn't change. And so that we hand out these lists of cultural practices that don't change over time. And what the people who are continuing this work are cautioning us to is to make sure that we understand that we continually re-engage with our students, so that we don't see culture as static and it's always changing. And that leads me to the last critique that I want to highlight here, which is that part of the reason why culture is in such flux is because we are always in response to the larger socio-political context. And I think particularly now, this is a really important thing for us to always engage in, because the ways in which policy and affects our students in our classrooms are ones that we have to constantly engage with in order to better serve them. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Nancy.
Thank you very much, Jolynn. That was really helpful. So given that background on what we've done with social-emotional dimensions of teaching and learning, and what Jolynn has just talked about with culturally responsive teaching, and all the issues surrounding that, what we realized was that after doing a 3-year study with WestEd on our work, what we did was we looked at whether or not what we thought we were doing at San Jose State in teacher preparation in terms of bringing to the fore the preparation of student teachers for social-emotional learning practices, what we wanted to do was to see, did they see it that way? Did they see that they were getting social-emotional learning skills and an understanding of it and its importance to the curriculum in their program? And what we found was that the faculty were doing an excellent job of bringing social-emotional learning skills out in their courses across the program. There wasn't a separate course, it was integrated throughout the program in the various methods courses. And Patty Swanson is going to be talking about what that really looks like in a few minutes here. But what we wanted to do was to say, okay, do they have enough to be able to go into the classroom and to do it on their own, to integrate social-emotional learning skills in the curriculum? And the answer was not quite. They had a total understanding of the need for it. They were very committed to it, but they wanted more practical ideas of what does it really look like in the classroom. And that has led us over the past 3 years to develop what we're calling the anchor competencies for implementation of SEDTL CRT lens. And basically what that is we're saying that we realize that the 5 CASEL competencies are great. It's a great starting place. The framework is very helpful, but that's at the 30,000 foot level. We needed to come down to the ground. And what does that look like enacted in the classroom? And so what we did was, we had a group of people from the center, from San Jose State University. We had faculty and university supervisors, and we had cooperating teachers in the field who were working with us to help us in the development of these anchor competencies. And so what we did was we took those 5 SEL competencies from CASEL, and brought them down to 7 social-emotional learning, culturally responsive teaching anchor competencies. So you can see we added in culturally responsive teaching practices as part of the lens. And you can see that there are 7 of them that integrate these, and the intention is that they're integrated across the program. So what we are hoping is that this becomes a roadmap for teacher preparation programs, and that our schema and resource guide that I will talk about can help to guide teacher preparation programs if they would like to have some help at figuring out what does it look like to bring SEL and CRT into our program in a deep and meaningful way, where our candidates will then be part of a pipeline of teachers coming into the field who are very strong in this area and integrated into their practice. And I will say that the notion of anchor competencies, if you think about the idea of a ship's anchor with the rope, and what we see is that each of these 7 anchor competencies, you want to lay them down, essentially, get them in the ground in the classroom the first 6 weeks of school, and then you've got the rope that follows all the way through the school year so that these anchor competencies are then integrated throughout the school year. So what this looks like, our schema is pretty dense here, and what I'm going to do is take you through it one step at a time, one circle at a time, as it were. First of all, we look at the context, and if that'll harken back to what Jolynn was just talking about previously, that in order to deal with social-emotional learning competencies, we also have to look at the context that they are bringing to the classroom. And this is both teachers and students. So what we came up with in there was the social political context, the cultural context, the community, and the individual context. And that all of those are very important for the teacher to bear in mind, and frankly, for the administrators to bear in mind with teachers. And for all of us as teacher educators to bear in mind with our candidates who come into the program. So that's the first ring there, the whole person. And we specifically said the whole person rather than the whole student because we are talking about adults and children. Next, you see the developing of an SEDTL CRT lens. So we're not talking about a program, we're talking about a lens. What does that mean? So what we're referring to is the development of a way of looking at the world that causes you to look for different kinds of information, gather different kinds of data, analyze it, and respond differently. And in order to do so, what we have found is that you have to provide opportunities related to each of the anchor competencies, the opportunity for candidates to explore their own assumptions and beliefs, to see good modeling, both at the university and in the field, and to be provided with practice. And again, that can occur both in courses at the university and in the field assignment, and to reflect on the practice. And it's an iterative process. And what we suggest that programs need to do is, as they're looking at these anchor competencies and where they play out in their program, and likely several of those competencies are already in the program, but maybe are not called out as specifically, but then looking at, do you go beyond exploring assumptions or looking at theories? Is there opportunity for modeling? Is there opportunity for practice and for reflection? So that's what we're encouraging. And then you see that when you do this, you look at the contexts that the students are bringing and the teachers are bringing. You develop this lens related to each of the 7 anchor competencies. And then to the last ring, you see that there are sample teacher moves. This is not by any means meant to be comprehensive, but the teacher moves help you to see more specifically, for example, with foster growth mindset, down on the bottom right side as an anchor competency. You look at the teacher moves. Well, the teacher needs to articulate affirming counter narratives for children. They often need to shift self-talk if the self-talk is negative, and that can relate to the context from which the children come. And they need to send affirming messages. And that's a good start, but then what they also need to do what we need to do is to provide very specific strategies for how do you articulate affirming counter narratives or shift self-talk. So what we did was, since there was just not room for another circle on the outside, we came up with a resource guide to accompany this circle schema. And when you look at this chart, you can see that on the left side, you've got some three sample anchor competencies. You've got next to it teacher moves, sample teacher moves that relate to these particular competencies, although there's clearly transfer over from one competency to another. They're all interconnected. And then what you see is very specific sample strategies that a teacher can try out. So a student teacher, a cooperating teacher, a faculty member could try it out in the classroom, et cetera. For example, fostering a growth mindset that I was just talking about, you can give students practice in identifying narratives and counter narratives through stories and poetry. And we actually have the names of books, and Jolene's done a lot of work in this to provide lists of books at different grade levels that can be used, where characters are coming in with certain narratives and that may either be positive or not positive, and then how do you respond to them as the teacher to get them into a growth mindset. Building trusting relationships, an example of a very specific strategy that helps the teacher to develop the positive productive rapport could be the 210 activity, which comes from responsive classrooms. And that's 2 minutes a day for 10 days. Talking with an individual student who maybe has been keeping you up at night and you don't feel that you have a great rapport with. You might talk to them and say, not about their behavior, not about the content, but just about their lives, about pets they may have, about sports they may be in, whatever that is personal to them. And 2 minutes a day for 10 days. And one of the things we found is it totally changes the relationship and starts building that rapport. So we know building trusting relationships is really important. It's talked about in the literature everywhere, but you need to get down to what does that really look like in practice, and that's what we're trying to do. And now you can see that the California Teacher Performance Expectations, what we've tried to do is make an alignment for you between the anchor competencies and the TPEs. So you can see in each one of them, interestingly enough, we kind of think like it's the master anchor is building trusting relationships, because no matter what you're doing, that's going to be a part of it. But then you've got, like with TPE number 1, engaging and supporting all students in learning, you've got to create the classroom community, foster self-reflection, cultivate perseverance. That's all part of engaging and supporting the students. But again, it's taking it from the expectation, the TPE, down to what does this start looking like in the classroom. So what I'm going to do now is turn it over to Patty Swanson, who, Dr. Patty Swanson is chair of the Department of Teacher Education at San Jose State University. She's also been deeply involved in the work of our center just about since its inception. And she's worked on integrating SEL CRT into both her own mathematics methods course, as well as looking at it across the program. So I'm going to turn it over to her now.
Thank you so much, Nancy, for that introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here and have an opportunity to talk about this work. I also have to start by thanking Nancy because, as she mentioned earlier, for 9 years, she has been working with San Jose State University, specifically helping us grow this SEDTL lens and think about how do we cultivate that for our candidates and how do we help them actually, beyond cultivate it, implement classroom practices which foster student social and emotional welfare. So it's a pleasure to have an opportunity to talk a little bit specifically about the work that we've done at San Jose State. One of the ways I'm going to talk about this is through a lens that says, how do you know when something like this has been institutionalized at the university level or within the Department of Teacher Education? And I want to say, first of all, it was a process that we gave ample time to, And it impacted, of course, first that which matters so much to us, which was our instruction. How would it manifest itself in course syllabi, in assessments used in courses, in the development of certain instructional tools like a lesson plan template or an observation protocol, and of course in connections between classes. Once those instructional things start happening, I want to say there are also institutional things that reflect, yes, this is a core value of our department and within the institution. And you start to see attention to SEDTL and things like our mission and vision statements. In all of the work we did to try and create a common language or a framework for talking about these things, these practices that we wanted students to do and the whys behind them. You start to see it in institutional things like when we look for new hires, new faculty hires, you start to see preferred characteristics that we're looking for people who have some expertise in these areas. And then finally, and perhaps terribly importantly, it starts to influence the school districts and the institutions that you partner with, because you're looking for settings where students will be able to see and practice these skills that we want to be a fundamental core of our program. So it involves your placements with districts and ongoing conversations about instruction and practices in terms of those settings where your beginning teacher candidates are going to teach. I'm going to take it back to the instructional level, which is definitely where my heart lies. I worked with Nancy's project for years as the math methods instructor at San Jose State before I became chair, and found it tremendously satisfying to think, what are the ramifications of SEDTL in terms of teaching mathematics? And that's going to lead me to the point that I really want to make in my next two slides, which is, when you know it's institutionalized, it's not just a little thing in one course or another thing in another course. It connects courses. It becomes a strand where I can, in my math methods, make reference to what happened in Psych Foundations. And where in Psych Foundations, they might say, and when you take math methods, this is one of the things you'll explore. And when you student teach, this is one of the lessons we'll ask you to implement. So I'm going to move now to really, how do you know it's institutionalized? When it's deeply embedded in instruction and when the instruction is coherent, developmental, and aligned across the program. I won't say we're all the way there yet, but I think we're showing signs of developing a strong thread around these ideas. So let me give you, I'm going to give two concrete examples here. The first around actually what ends up being sort of the left-hand side of the wheel, really the anchor competencies of developing classroom community, practicing cooperative skills, responding to conflict. And I'm going to talk about how are those anchor competencies developed through a string of courses that students take in our program. So if you look to the far left, you will see one of our faculty who teaches a course generally called Social Multicultural Foundations. And in that, she really explores Nell Notting's work around a care ethic. She explores developing counter narratives with the students. And within her class, she engages her teacher candidate students in developing a set of classroom norms such that they can have safe conversations where they can disagree with one another, where they can explore deep ideas and often difficult ideas to grapple with, where they can question their own beliefs and assumptions. When she does this developing of classroom norms in this foundations class, and as all of us know, really, we often look to our foundations classes to get our candidates to question beliefs and assumptions. That's difficult work, and it takes a strong set of classroom norms to have those kind of conversations. So these are things that happen in social multicultural foundations. I want to say the following semester, our candidates begin student teaching, and they also take a course often called the management course, but it's really about establishing positive classroom environments. And in that class, again, these same themes are picked up by the instructor, who actually at the beginning of every class models a morning meeting for our candidates. And in that morning meeting, at their level, at the teacher level, they bring to the floor issues that need to be talked about, conflicts, questions, things they want to address, and they work to build consensus on how will we resolve these issues that are coming up in our program and our student teaching. In other words, it is problem solving there in the classroom, and it is modeling what we, of course, hope they will do in their own classroom. I want to say, if you want to take it one step further, they also take what was my course, Mathematics Methods, and in Mathematics Methods, where we build on this work is we look at how do you develop specifically in your students the group norms you would need such that your students learn to interact with each other. So we do a series of skill builders. This is a picture of us doing a simulation of one of these cooperative group work skill builders, where students where candidates reenact working with students, trying to teach them how important it is when you're working on a group task that is interdependent, to explain your reasoning, to be able to ask for help, to look at asking for help is one of the smartest things you could ever do as a student, which I want to say is going to feed into growth mindset, which we will talk about in a few moments. So in Mathematics Methods, we really go deeply into how do you develop all the norms for cooperative group work. Again, an additional sophistication to their repertoire of skills in terms of classroom, creating that positive classroom community. Okay, I'm going to give one more example. Well, this is more really along the SEL dimensions of social skills, if you will. I'm going to turn to one that's more deeply rooted in psychological theories and talk about the anchor competency of resilience, which is, of course, also related to perseverance and growth mindset. So in our Psych Foundations course, again, one of the first courses they take, the instructor goes deeply into exploring goal or attribution theory in terms of to what do we attribute our successes and failures. This sets the foundation for understanding how we would begin to develop a growth mindset in our students, such that they attribute their successes to, I worked really hard, I practiced that, I put in good effort. And if they are not successful with something, rather than thinking, oh, I'm not smart enough, I want them to think, oh, I just need to work harder at this. I need to be able to change my strategy. I need to take this big goal and chunk it in ways that will make it more manageable. But rather than giving up, thinking what are ways to re-engage, and that if we do, and when we do, we're usually successful. The foundations for this are laid in Psych Foundations. And I want to say then, again, candidates would come to my class and we would particularly model the application of these ideas around a series of classes that we did looking at how do you help students master, now I'm talking kids students, their basic facts. And in the context of that really big issue, which I want to say for many students can be quite destructive in schools if they think, oh, I'm not good at this, they make an attribution that, oh, I'm not good at math, which is of course not true. So in that context, we model an instructional strategy called number talks, and I actually have candidates practice doing number talks in class with their colleagues, where you're developing strategies for problem solving with students, such that rather than just memorizing what's 8 times 7, they would think, what are ways I could figure out strategies for figuring out 8 times 7. We find that once students look at a variety of strategies, choose strategies that are efficient for themselves, they actually do master their basic facts. Within that context, we also talk about students engaging in self-assessment and looking at this, how do you help students see, yes, mastering your basic facts, it's a gigantic task. And we look at goal setting and the idea that, well, when we have gigantic tasks, what we want to do is we want to chunk them. We want to make them into smaller, more manageable tasks. And then we want to reflect constantly on how am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing? And so we look at goal setting, we look at self-assessment, we look at students tracking their own progress as they master their basic facts. And I want to say all of this leads to the idea that when we have a difficult, challenging task, if we chunk it, if we go at it step by step, if we persevere, those are the actions that develop a growth mindset. We can't lecture students into a growth mindset. We have to have them prove to themselves that that's an effective way to look at their own learning. Finally, I want to go back to what is the circle on developing the SEDTL CRT lens and say that it is not enough to just talk about it in your courses. We really, in our courses, yes, we absolutely explored assumptions, but then we would model practices which led to some of these anchor competencies. Often, for instance, in the math class where students practice number talks, they would practice in class, we would reflect on how well it worked and what it accomplished. And then I also want to say, you want to carry it into the field. So for instance, this year we're using a video platform where we can look at students' work in the field. We're doing that as part of getting ready for the Cal TPA, which we are field testing at the moment. But students are asked, okay, do a number talk in your student teaching placement, post it, get feedback from your colleagues, reflect on it. This issue of moving beyond talking to modeling in class, and then beyond modeling to having them practice, and then carrying that practice into the field and again reflecting on it, I think is critical in terms of learning some of these very complex and important teacher strategies and behaviors.
Thank you so much, Patty, for that detailed description of what is going on, the wonderful work at San Jose State. I want to add to that what Patty was talking about in terms of the field, to say that we have developed at the center a series of 4 two-hour sessions for cooperating teachers so that we can start bringing on board the cooperating teachers in terms of their knowledge base and ability to model and help student teachers practice this SEL CRT lens. And what we've done is we've been working a lot with Sunnyvale School District, and they and in Sunnyvale, what we've done is the district pays the student teachers half-day sub pay, and the cooperating teachers come out during the day. They come out during the day and in the morning and meet with us, and it gives them an opportunity to have a community, and they also, their student teachers get the opportunity to practice in a very limited way on their own in the classroom, taking over the class, and it keeps the class going on. And with minimum disruption, because the student teacher knows the students, knows the curriculum. So, and that has worked really well. And it's also saying that this is important work and teachers should be able to do it during the school day, not as an add-on. So I guess you could say the theme in our work a lot is not adding on things, but integrating into. So just to sum up, we would say the time is right. It's a very exciting time in California. California not only has the new teacher performance expectations that call out social emotional learning and culturally responsive teaching practices, but we are also one of the participating states in CASEL's Collaborating States Initiative. So we have been involved in the planning committee, developing the guiding principles that are going to be out shortly. So you'll want to stay tuned for that because they were just completed and they're going to be sent out. And they're very exciting because they include attention to the importance of pre-service in bringing SEL CRT into the schools. And finally, Common Core State Standards, moving into that away from NCLB, you can see that the Common Core Standards really require attention to SEL CRT and therefore really support this integration in across the school day. So with that, I would like to just finally say a little bit of a plug for the CRTWC Year-Long Teacher Educator Institute. It is a place, it's a year-long, we're going to be having 2 retreats, one in August, one in the following June. This is in 2018-19. It'll be a second cohort. We have a cohort going through right now. And people who are attending it will receive in-depth practice, understanding of our framework and the resources that go with it. They'll develop a really powerful, deep SEL CRT lens that they can then take back to their programs to help integrate both into their own courses and across their programs. And it's going to start in August 2018. Currently, we have 5 institutions across the country who are participating, and it's been very exciting to see the level of response to. There's been a lot of enthusiasm. It's $2,000 per person. We are strongly encouraging a team of at least 2 individuals from any given campus to attend. And if you want to check it out and get more information about it, and also learn more about our work, see a video of teachers talking about what they've done with us, please go to our website, www.crtwc.org, that you see at the top of this page. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Brad Strong.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and to our other presenters. Fabulous job. I think we have time for 2 or 3 questions, so probably be helpful to go even deeper into the question of what genuine integration looks like. I know an incredible amount of work has been done at the Commission on Teacher Credentialing to update the standards and expectations, and over the last 3 or 4 years, I know that many of all of you on the phone and the programs themselves have been knee-deep in the efforts to incorporate these into your program. So thank you for that. So on that first question I have is for Dr. Markowitz, Executive Director of the Center for Reaching and Teaching the Whole Child. Nancy, the question for you is, realizing how difficult it is to develop partnerships with school districts, how have you worked to develop the social-emotional learning culturally responsive lens with your cooperating teachers to ensure that the teacher candidates are supposed to be are supported in their social-emotional learning and culturally responsive teaching practices?
Well, first I will say, and Patty's been involved in this and has done some tremendous work with it, is that in terms of developing the relationships with the districts that then lead to being able to work with cooperating teachers, is you've got to have face-to-face interaction. And a really great example of that is Patty coming as chair of the Department of Teacher Ed, coming to Sunnyvale School District and talking at a meeting with all of the principals in the school district, and coming with the student teacher coordinator and a faculty member and saying, you know, here's what we're doing, here's what we're trying to do, and we really want to work with you. And we see that as an essential first step. It makes a huge difference when there's face-to-face interaction and a real effort by the university to institute, to initiate that communication and the partnership. And then once that's done, we find that certainly Sunnyvale School District, which we highly recommend you contact Dr. Mike Gallagher, who is the Associate Superintendent of Human Resources in that district and has been doing a lot of leadership work in that district around this, that they decided it's a great deal to pay just the student teachers for half-day sub-pay so that these cooperating teachers can come and engage in work with us at the center. And it's because it's very little to pay for the sub for half a day for 4 times over the course of a semester. And then to have the cooperating teacher go back and be able to try things out and work with the student teacher. And the student teacher can then engage with the cooperating teacher because they've been getting this material at state as well. So it becomes a wonderful interaction, and we've had extremely positive response by cooperating teachers to our work. And I encourage people to go to our website and look at the video, Voices from the Field, because you can hear directly from teachers who've been involved with us and acted as cooperating teachers what they say about it.
Great, thank you. The next question then, let's ask, so Dr. Swanson, you talked a lot about the integration and I think really gave some concrete examples of kind of things you've seen differently within the program, and I think those are probably speak to, you know, things that programs can look for to assess the fidelity of the integration and efforts. So in terms of that, I mean, I guess in starting your efforts, you clearly needed leadership, which I assume was a major part. So how did you develop that leadership? Also, how did you develop widespread support throughout your program with your faculty, with your cooperating teachers? And then, you know, so what's the leadership role, and what's the building a community of support and
no, I think I can pick up on that. Okay. First of all, I want to really say San Jose State University was tremendously fortunate in that Nancy was part of our faculty. And it was really her initiative that started us on this. And largely, we would do tasks, which I'll also refer to again later. We would sit down in course groups and we would talk about what's in our course, what might we want to modify. We shared lessons that we were trying out with one another. We talked about them as a group. Really, what Nancy initially did for us at San Jose State, in addition to having a vision of where she wanted it to go, was she gave us time to talk about it. And we got very, very concrete on how would it look in different courses. In other words, for instance, math methods is a classically good place to talk about and give strategies for developing a growth mindset. It's really essential in mathematics. Social studies is a classically good course in which to talk about conflict resolution and monitoring and fostering a safe discussion. So it wasn't conversations like this that we really looked, each one of us who was involved with the project and working with it, which ultimately became most of us, is you look deeply at what's in your course. You think, how could I do better at fostering these essential SEDTL skills? How can I give students opportunity to practice it? I want to say the second thing that Nancy started was the idea that we are going to work really closely with our field supervisors such that what we talk about in our courses, we have this common language that's going to travel out to the field and we're going to be looking for some of the same things. And tools like the lesson plan template or an observation guide, all those things are tremendously helpful in terms of strengthening what is often a far too weak a link between coursework and student teaching. That being said, I'll just add sort of from chair perspective now, as I now sort of look at the whole and what are we doing as a program to sustain these practices and continue to develop. Honestly, this last year, one of the things we did is we, as many institutions are doing, we looked at the new TPEs and we once again engaged in a process of making a matrix of all our courses and looking at where are these things introduced, where are they practiced, where are they assessed. And once again, it sort of was a touch bases with, do we see these consistent threads to our program? How are they developed and how are they developed over a string of courses? So that kind of work where you take all your courses, you check back with the TPEs, and then you carry it beyond, it has to go beyond, oh yeah, I do that in my course. Oh yeah, I do that in my course. But rather, how deeply do you go? Do students have any practice opportunities? Do they have opportunities to receive formative feedback on their development of these ideas and skills? And then do we carry it through to the field where they practice it? And do they then get feedback in the field as they practice it? Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. In fact, and the anchor competencies are seem to be that connector. I mean, it takes us from what was done at the Commission on Teacher Credentialing to actually make it, more concrete for the programs and your faculty in terms of the goals that are being sought. So I think that definitely makes sense.
For our candidates, what the anchor competencies are doing is they're helping them see this is what it looks like. This is what it's called. Now we can talk about it. Now we can enact it or attempt to enact it and talk about the it. The anchor competencies did move it from our early years. We were 30,000 feet in the air. Now I'd say we're pretty grounded in what does it look like in the classroom.
And I'll just add, this is Nancy, I'll add one more thing to Patty's really thorough description of what happened at State. But one thing that often doesn't happen, I think, for faculty that they really appreciated in the early years of doing this work was the opportunity to look at videos of teaching practice, to look at case studies, and to do analysis, to say, okay, let's take an SEL lens or an SEL CRT lens and use that lens to analyze what's going on in this video, in this example of a lesson. And that was hugely helpful to faculty because, again, it brought it down to a very concrete level. We're expecting our students to do that, so we wanted to engage in that kind of activity as well.
Great. Thank you all. I think, actually, if we can go back one slide, and I'm going to ask one final question. Nancy, the question on the deadline, are there deadlines to apply for the Teacher Institute?
It's around March 9, I believe. It's definitely on the application form that is accessible on our website. But it's March that is the deadline. And one of the things is that besides what I mentioned earlier about strongly encouraging people to come in, a team of at least 2 people from an institution, that they also have a letter of support from either their chair or the dean for them to do this. Because what we're working on is helping people not only to look at what they're doing in their own courses, but also to have an impact on their programs. We think this is a really exciting time, and we want to support the changes that people want to see happen.
Excellent. Thank you so much to all the presenters for the wonderful information, and to all the audience for joining us today. And I think we wish you the best in really carrying out these standards and implementing them because we know it is in the best interest of the children in California and the nation. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.